Welcome to the Core Women Podcast. My name is Dr. Summer Watson. I'm a doctor of psychology, podcaster, published author, coach, producer of documentary empowerment films, and empowerment seminars. This podcast is a special place for the hearts and souls of women. It is a place where women share their journeys, strength, resiliency, strategy, and passions. Today on the show, I would like to welcome Sulavon Bollinger, who is an award-winning petite fashion model, VO or voice-over actress, digital marketer, gamer, host of Sulavons SheShed, and Businesswoman. We have so much to talk about, so let's dive right into this, Sulavon, and welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me on your show today, Summer.
Absolutely. So before we jump right into your professional background, can you tell me a little bit and the listeners a bit about your personal background and journey, where you grew up and your interests?
Most definitely. So I was born in Freeport, Illinois. My dad was military. My parents were really young. I think they were like in high school when I was born. So my dad had just entered the military. He was starting in the Army, and then he tested out and tested into the Air Force, basically. So I was basically born in Freeport, Illinois, but I never lived there. Yeah, so I was basically born, and then a couple of months after I was born, my dad was sent to, well, not just my dad, my mom and I were sent to South Korea. And it's really funny because a lot of people that have never grown up in like the military world don't understand that. They're like, well, what do you mean you didn't grow up where you were born? And I was like, well.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey for sure. I was a military spouse for 21 years, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. And then my best friend was a diplomat's child, so she was all over the place too.
Yes.
So basically, I grew up in Korea. I spoke Korean to like two Koreans, as I was growing up. My babysitter or nanny, however you want to phrase that, was Korean. So I remember her like speaking to me. I spoke like Lao and Thai mainly to my mom because my mom spoke Lao and Thai and French, and then she spoke American English, but it was like her version of American English, what she was, like learned. And then I spoke like American English like my dad, and like I would just say the others when I was little because I was like, I spent so much time with my mom growing up that it was like I just like pictured my mom as my world basically.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, we came back from Korea, and then we lived all over the South. So we were kind of like in Texas for a spell. Then we were in Mississippi. I think Biloxi, Mississippi. We were in Mobile, Alabama. We were in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Then we moved, and somewhere in that process, I acquired a little brother. And then we moved to Washington State. So my dad, I can't remember which base he was at. I know at the time, there's Fort Lewis and there's McCord Air Force Base. But at the time when we lived there, they had like limited housing for military families that were under a certain rank at the time.
Right.
So we ended up having to live off base. And so I generally, when I'm like sharing my story with people, I just say Seattle because people don't know the different bases. So we basically lived like, in Washington State for a while. And we were in Parkland because I went to school in Parkland and also Tacoma. So Tacoma was a little bit at the time, it was a bit rough. So a lot of people didn't really, not a lot of people, I mean like the kids at school didn't really like understand me. It was like predominantly like a Black neighborhood at the time. So like the kids they just thought that I was the white girl basically. So that was an interesting experience growing up there.
Yeah. Wow, that is an interesting journey for sure. And I absolutely get what you're talking about when you say off base. So
yeah.
Being a military spouse, I lived off base in Okinawa, Japan. Because of the same reason, they didn't have housing for some of the military. So go ahead.
Yeah. And then after we left there, and like I try to explain this to people that have never experienced like even military life or political life or corporate life, because some of my friends grew up as like corporate kids, and some of my friends grew up as children of diplomats. So they moved every couple of years, and that's very similar to military lifestyle as well, because it is it's government, so you're like moving every couple of years depending on what branch. But so after that, we went to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. That was in Arizona. And then we were there for a spell as well. And then we ended up in like the rural Midwest randomly for 6 years.
Mm.
We were like on our way up to like Springfield and Chicago. And I don't know. We just ended up being in the rural Midwest. So I lived in Marion and Carbondale for a spell. By a spell, I don't mean 2 to 3 years. I mean like 6 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And at that time, my dad was already out of the military. Um, I can't remember. I think he was working on computer science because he was like really tech savvy and like into all things tech basically. So that experience in Washington wasn't really pleasant. And the experience in like the rural Midwest was a bit weird. Like from coming from like a port city, coming
Right.
from like Washington State where there's like well, the areas in Washington State that I was in were very diverse and there were basically port cities or right near port city. So going to like a landlocked area was really weird because it's like people are a bit more tribal in like landlocked areas, I think.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Um, yeah, so that was definitely really interesting. And then 2009, I wasn't living in Marion, I was living in Carmel at the time. I then went up to Chicago because we had family in Chicago and Milwaukee. And then I relocated to Los Angeles in 2012. And then like pre-pandemic, I tended to flutter back and forth between like Los Angeles, New York, and DC.
Okay. Can you talk about, as you move from place to place to place to place, how did you actually harness your passions, and what did your professional career start looking like?
Oh yeah. So I think moving place to place to place, you learn how to interact with a wide variety of people. And
Yes.
you definitely learn how to like adapt very quickly. And I feel like that's what really drew me to kind of like modeling and acting was that you're constantly adapting. And with modeling, it's basically like dress up, but you're just playing characterizations or characters. But it's not as, I guess, as physically active as say like an actor. With modeling, it's more like the aesthetic and like the idea behind it, which is what I really liked. So I decided I wanted to do something creative. I didn't want to work government because like some of my dad's family had worked, government in DC. One of my uncles was in the Navy, and then it was just I didn't want to go that route. Like I didn't want to go like the hard left brain route with like business or government. And my mom's family were kind of like they worked like more like technical careers with kind of like I don't want to say blue collar because they did like a little bit more work than like blue collar. It was more management as well. But like my mom's family, when they were in Asia, they had a farm and businesses. So it was kind of interesting. I wanted something that was kind of like in the middle of the two, both creative, but both
Right.
technical in some sort of way. So 2003 was when I started modeling, but it wasn't like professional. I was just modeling for older friends who had like college projects.
Okay.
So they basically dressed me up as their doll. And I also auditioned for Millie Lewis International in Carbondale at the time, but I was rejected at the time. I don't think they wanted to like really like hire a lot of like really young talent at the time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Around 2004, 2005, I one of my friends told me about Model Mayhem. So I started going on Model Mayhem and I was basically like researching everything. I'm like, well, how does this work? Like, how does it work if you're an agent? How does it work if you're a model? How do you do freelance modeling different from an agency? How do you appeal to an agency? So I was like just researching and like kind of like putting together my idea of what I wanted to do. And there were two sites at the time when I was getting started. There was Model Mayhem, which is more catered towards freelancers. And then there was
Mm-hmm.
modelscouts.com, which is modelscouts.com. I think it was at the time it was like $100 a month, but I was so young I couldn't afford that. So I was like, that's a lot of money. So I just did Model Mayhem when I was younger. And then I started networking through there. So my friends basically gave me permission to post the photos that they took of me. And then I started actually being contacted by professional photographers. So then I started to work on building my portfolio. So then around 2007, 2009, I was scouted by a New York talent scout. His name is Michelle Tullieri.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when I was in the process of moving from Carbondale to Chicago. And yeah, that was interesting because like most people when they start out, like within like 3 years, I was already starting to put together, I had put my portfolio together. I was already getting contacted by talent agents, and Michel Tullier was the primary talent agent in the US that I respect and always mention in interviews, because he was the most honest, but he was also the least prejudiced in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I was also being contacted by Bigfoot Entertainment, which is I don't know if like a lot of Americans know what Bigfoot Entertainment is, but that's like a production company in the Philippines, and they're very
Okay.
reputable. They
Uh-huh.
have one of their studio points is in Cebu, Philippines, and that's like a big hub for like film in the Philippines. Well, at the time, I don't know if it is still now. But he also had Mick Gleisner had contacted me, so he had a film he was working on with Baby Fam, and he was saying, "Have you ever done acting? Would you be open to acting? It would be you would be working with Baby Fam." And I was like, "Oh my God, Baby Fam!"
Mm-hmm.
Like I knew who she was, but then I would say it to my friends here, and they're like, "Who's that?" I'm like, "Okay, never mind." So yeah, I was being contacted for like work with Bigfoot Entertainment and a couple other companies as well. But like I don't even bother mentioning those here, because like if I say it, like most Americans don't know what it is, so it's just kind of like it doesn't matter. So at that time period too, I was dealing with like other agents that weren't like Michelle. They were very ignorant of like standards of beauty that were outside of the United States. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that like a lot of people who have family that have grown up overseas are more like aware of it, but they would say things like that were really rude. So I was, pre-car accident, I was like 5'2", 5'3",
Mm-hmm.
and I would go in and some of the agents would be very nice to me, but then they would kind of like do that double-handed slap, like verbal slap, where they would say,
Yeah.
well, but you're this or you're that.
Yeah.
And
It's a backhanded compliment.
yeah, definitely. And a
Yeah.
lot of it was a racist undertone, because when I was younger, I looked more like my mom. Like I looked more Asian. So
Yeah. So let me cut in here real quickly
yeah, yeah.
because you do keep mentioning, like these racial undertones and maybe
Mm-hmm.
prejudice and least prejudice. Can you
Mm-hmm.
tell the listeners a little bit about your racial background?
Yeah, yeah. So this hasn't been really talked about until more recently with like Model Alliance and Sarah Ziff. But there's basically a hierarchy in the modeling industry, and it's predominantly in the Western industries. And if you do not fit into, well, at the time, because it's shifted now since 2013, it's a little bit more diverse, but there's still have issues. But there was a hierarchy basically. So if you were like full white, like blonde hair, blue eyed, or you are obviously Caucasian, and that was like very desirable. But if you were like mixed or anything like that, you were like lower down in the hierarchy. And then if you were mixed and petite, you were lower down on the hierarchy. But Michel Tullier had experiences too, and he just experienced observing all of that in the industry, and that's why he is still around, because he didn't treat people like that. Like he would figure out a way to work with models he thought were going to be really really good in the industry. It was for me like I'm obviously, like I was saying, I'm mixed, but I'm also petite. So my mom is, she has Mon, which is like Indian background
Mm-hmm.
and South Asian and Chinese, but she was born
Okay.
and raised in Laos. So my mom also lived in Thailand. So my
Mm.
mom, like my mom is mixed herself as well. And my dad's family were mainly Irish and French descent. He's like second or third generation.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was younger, I resembled my mom more closely. And then when I got older, it's like it's almost like my physiology kind of changed. Like my face was more narrow, like more like my
Right.
dad's. And I just like I look more like my father's family now, which is really weird because when I was younger, I didn't. Like,
Yeah, I know. We changed so drastically, especially during our teen years, like our preteen and teen
mhm,
years. So yeah, and I actually did the same because I'm of mixed background too. So
mhm,
it's really interesting how that actually happens. And my hair was really, really, really straight,
mhm,
like my dad, who's Filipino,
mhm,
and then my during preteen and teen, my hair got really curly and wavy, like my mom's,
mhm.
who is Armenian.
Oh,
and you're
wow.
Eden. So it's like, wow, just that shift. And my mom's like, wow, your hair is really, I'm like, I know. Thanks, Mom.
You're like, Mom, I can feel it. I can see
I
it.
can feel it. Exactly. So we do change. So go on. This is really interesting.
Yeah. And it was really interesting. If anyone's interested, you can definitely read about this because it's actually been documented and studied. I did take part in a study with Model Alliance because Sarah had invited me directly and I was talking to her online. They actually do document it. There is actual, in the American market especially, they put a very high priority over basically whitewashing. So a lot of models of color don't even get an opportunity. And it's really sad. Like it's really sad because there are a lot of really beautiful girls that and guys too, but you know, I'm a girl, I'm speaking as a girl. Um, there are a lot of like really beautiful women out there and girls too. And Model Alliance basically honed in on that and did a study on it with some of the college professors. I think they were with NYC, if I remember correctly, and some in DC. But they've actually pulled in the data that there is a hierarchy system. There actually is a hierarchy system. It's not just like models of color or models of like mixed race, but um, just saying things to say it or like I don't know, like people like to do the gaslighting basically of
Right. Yeah.
models. Like it's what's
Yeah.
easier to say to a model? Oh, well, you just go off your looks, so you must therefore be stupid. So you must therefore not be aware of anything that's going on, which
Right.
is a stereotype, of course. But models have talked about that for a long time. And the other thing too, like petite models. So obviously I'm small in stature. I'm considered a petite model, but petite models were around until the late 1990s and early 2000s, and then that was phased out. And it wasn't brought back until about 2013 when there was that recession that happened in like 2007 to 2009 that really
Yeah.
affected everyone's businesses. So the
Right.
modeling agencies were trying to figure out how to make money because they built their rosters from the 80s and 90s. They built themselves up and they got rid of the divisions they originally had to build their agencies. And then when the economy got bad and it started to tank, people were trying to figure out how do we make money? How do we survive as an agency? So they started bringing back basically the diversity they initially had beforehand. Um,
Wow. That
mhm.
is an interesting road. And I think that with you just talking about model characterization and how you're perceived and what that looks like, do you think that from an outsider's perspective, it looks like things have changed?
Mhm.
These agencies have had to embrace diversity.
Mhm. Start all over again, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Every 10 years they switch it up.
Yeah. So you did a shift. You did a shift from modeling, film to digital marketing, correct?
Actually, I did that as a parallel career. So I was doing that
Ah,
while I was modeling. Um,
gotcha. Okay.
oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, with modeling, things I like things in other markets, like things that I was working on in other markets. I was already getting like agents contacting me, but I couldn't go overseas because I didn't have support of my family. So I wasn't going to travel overseas by myself. But I did do things remotely. So I did like a lot of marketing. I did like account executive work. And I never know if I should like do that. I don't want to like name drop, but like I was
Go
contacted
ahead.
by large studios in Asia.
Yeah.
So like Z Entertainment had contacted me. There was a famous not Gregorian, Jajorian designer, and
Mhm.
just there were just so many things that were going on in different markets. And then here people would just look at me with like blank eyes, like, what is that? So I was like, okay, never mind then. So do you know lafango.com? And they're like, or Lafango Talent. And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, never mind then. So it's just one of those things when you work with different markets, it's like
Yes.
some things transfer over and some things don't. Like, for example, I've worked with a lot of Bollywood.
Mhm.
So like one of my friends, Ashish, he is like a really like he owns Media Factory International. I also have worked with some of the other people that he's referred me to, and it's been fantastic. It's been great, and I think back then I really wanted to do Bollywood, but I was too skinny. So they
Mm.
wanted voluptuous women, and I was a beanpole. I was like a 000,
Wow.
extra
Okay.
small. And then
Wow.
now I'm still too small because it's like like I wear extra smalls and smalls, but that's like too skinny for certain markets. So it's like, I can just give up. I
Don't
don't
do
have,
that.
I don't have curves. But yeah, like some markets you really need to be curvy as well. So it's like I just didn't do well in those markets.
Right, right, right. No, I get you. I get you. It's really looking at that demographic
Mhm,
and looking at their magazines, looking at their television shows, and really studying those markets and
mhm,
seeing what they gear themselves towards. So yeah, it's really an interesting, and I wouldn't call it a game, but it's a really interesting dynamic.
mhm. And coming from my background is marketing, so
Yes.
like digital marketing, I started doing in 2011. I was basically recruited by Girl PR, and they're a really well-known marketing company. They have awards, and they were initially in New York and Miami, but they branched out to Las Vegas and Toronto as well. I think I think one of the owners is actually still in Toronto, but I was doing basically online sales for them, helping clients, and sometimes I would be hired by companies. I was hired by some of the studios here. I've actually worked with Paramount and a couple of their American studios in Hollywood. So I was doing basically the social media management, the community management, and working with Girl PR to bring in to do like ad campaigns and all of that. And I did digital marketing basically like in tandem as a parallel career with modeling for like 9 years. And I remember I when I got into the car accident, I was just kind of like, you know what? I'm healing up now and I feel very left behind because it changes so quickly. It's considered basically a subcategory of tech. And within a month, things can change in digital marketing so quickly, more
Yes.
specifically with social media. So it's like if you already fall a month behind, 2 months behind, 3 months behind, it's gonna take a while for you to get caught back up. So after doing that for 9 years, I got in the car accident and I was like, you know what? I'm done. I was like, I'm burnt out. I'm sick of people calling me a dumb model. I'm sick of people like stalking me online. And I just basically deleted my work account that I had. And I'm switching into cybersecurity now. And I actually really like
Gotcha.
cybersecurity. Yeah,
Okay.
more than digital marketing. But with digital marketing, I would say definitely go with Girl PR. If you want to
Okay.
do database building or campaigns, they're very
Mhm.
reasonably priced, and they also work with all levels of businesses. Like whether you're someone that's in the incubator phase or like getting started, I mean, they work with all levels.
Gotcha. Okay. So that is good guidance. You've been through a lot. You've overcome so many challenges. You keep touching on the car accident.
Mhm.
So, what would you say was one of your biggest challenges? Was it the car accident?
I would say there are two primary challenges.
Okay.
Challenges feeling like I didn't really have support at all. Like just getting
Mm.
started. I was seeing some of my girlfriends were signing with like Wilhelmina, they were signing with like Factor Women, they were signing with Lilies, they were signing with all of these agencies. But I felt very like it's not that my friends didn't support me. My friends were like very supportive, but they didn't understand what was going on. Like I felt very left behind, like years ago, basically. And I would say that was one of the biggest factors. But I don't know, like overall, like I do other things, so that wasn't like really all that painful, if that makes any sense. The car accident was actually really painful. I mean that
Yes.
like literally and figuratively, and a lot of people weren't understanding that. I was on a real estate. I also work in. This is going to confuse some of the listeners, but like I also work in real estate development. Like I'm the one that goes in and basically monitors everything. I do the communications through different teams because a lot of times in large projects, whether it's like on a movie set or whether it's on a development project, there's a breakdown in communication,
Hmm.
and a lot of times it's like the investor and the developer themselves will communicate amongst themselves, but they don't communicate with everyone else. So
Right.
I would be hired on to be that kind of, that go between like the actual contractors and sometimes union contractors, sometimes general contractors. I was like a translator basically. So
Right. It
sometimes
sounds
I,
like
mhm,
it sounds kind of like an event manager, kind of bringing
mhm,
all these people together
mhm,
so you can streamline a process or streamline a product, a
mhm.
development. So
Yeah,
yeah, I
definitely.
get it. Mhm.
Yeah, definitely project coordination and production coordination are parallel. They're very
Right.
similar. It's all the same parts of the machine, all the same moving aspects of the machine, but it's just different terminology. And then that was
Sure.
the main difference. So the car accident, sorry, to get back to the car accident.
That's
So
okay.
I had done a Bollywood project in New York, and I was working with Rakesh Shah, and I was working with some Bollywood A-listers. And then the project just, I don't know what happened. Like the investor, oh yeah, I remember the producer, his uncle was the investor, and they got in a family fight, and they just put the whole project on hold.
Oh
And I was
no.
like, oh my God, Family Feud, really?
Really? Come
Yes,
on, rise above this. This is business.
I know exactly. That's the only downside to bringing family in on projects, isn't it? So the rest of
Yeah.
us just we went and found different projects. So I went to work on a development project with Hershey in Baltimore, and the developer that we had at the time, he wasn't very like empathetic or anything towards any of the contractors, even the union contractors. He was just very like money oriented and very cutthroat. And there was a blizzard that came through in 2016. He literally had all of us work the day after the blizzard. So I was in a work vehicle with one of the other office, it was the project manager actually, and I was doing the coordination. So he sent us on an errand on the 83, and we were telling him a blizzard just came through. It's icy. We could get in a car accident. He didn't care. He says, "Do you want your
Mm,
paycheck or not?" And we're like, "Ah."
mm.
So it's always that feeling like when you're an adult, you're like, "Ah, I need that paycheck."
Right, right. So you were making the best decision for yourself because of for a monetary reason.
hmm
And so you got into that car, and then what happened?
Oh my God, it was rough. It was
Mm,
basically a 5-car pileup, and
mm,
we were in the center car, but luckily we were in a work vehicle, so we were in like a really strong car, but we still felt the aftermath of all the momentum of being hit. We got hit in the back, hit on the side twice, and slammed. We slammed against the wall. So I don't know if
oh,
anyone's ever been to Baltimore, but the 83 has like this concrete sides on it, and
yeah.
it's a 25-foot drop down. If you go
Wow.
over that, if you somehow go over that barricade or you go through it. So my side, I was on the passenger side, and I'm small, so I was like a ping pong ball. I was like, whoa! I didn't. It felt like it was like 5 seconds, but it was actually I think it was actually quicker than that. I think it was like 2 seconds, but it was weird because it felt like it was in slow motion. But I was being whipped. My head got whipped back, whipped to the side. Each side where the cars were hitting our vehicle, and then my side, I was on the passenger side. We slammed into the concrete. The driver managed to maneuver it so we didn't go straight directly into the concrete or somehow hit it and go over it. Um, so it was like I slammed my head against the metal frame of the passenger door. I also slammed my head against the glass,
Mm,
and I remember like we just stopped, and when you're kind of in a situation and you just kind of freeze. Is there something else coming? Like
right.
we
Oh,
were
sure.
sitting
Yeah.
there, and I was seeing stars. I remember I was just like I was blinking, and it was like I was seeing like these what are they called? The black float. What are they called? Summer. I can't remember what they're called.
Like the floaters, the stars,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
So,
I was seeing
mhm,
floaters. I was seeing like little black dots basically.
okay.
And
Right.
my coworker, he was substantially larger than me,
Mhm.
like a big guy basically, like a construction guy. He's
Yeah.
like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, I feel like someone just put me in like a dishwasher."
Oh, or a dryer.
Yeah, or something like
You
that. I'm like,
know?
I'm not feeling anything yet, but I have a feeling I'm gonna feel it. And I was right.
Yeah, I mean, there might have been some traumatic brain injury there because of you being like tousled,
Mhm.
back and forth. And I watch, just so that I watch occasionally NASCAR, and they actually have these barrier walls for accidents to lighten the blow.
Mhm.
And when you're on a freeway or highway, or, like you said, us Californians and West Coasters, the 83,
Mhm.
um, it's like you don't have those barriers. You
Mhm.
don't have the safety of certain barriers where they put in place, and they try to, but it's not going to necessarily lighten the impact. So the long-term effects, I'm sure, are there still. So how are you dealing today?
So now I'm substantially better. Like I can actually form sentences that make sense.
Gotcha.
But initially, right after that, 2 weeks later, I was having blackouts. I was
Mm,
having shaking. I was in a lot of pain. And the thing is, my insurance didn't transfer out of the state of California to Baltimore. like to Maryland.
Oh,
So I was like,
no.
are you kidding me? I'm like, I'm gonna have to pay this all out of pocket. So I took, I took on other projects while I was injured to pay my medical bills. And I think the stress from that and like everything accumulated caused the relapse. I think a fusion of that caused the relapse. So I had a relapse August 2018. And I I just blacked out. I hit my dresser and I hit the floor and I had a guinea pig by the name of Sputs. I still have him, but he was a baby at the time. And he heard me fall and he somehow escaped his pen. I still don't know how he did it. But when I came through, he was like by me, freaking out. This poor little baby of a guinea pig was
Oh,
squeaking because he thought I had died. I think he heard me hit the dresser. But
right.
my poor little guy. So I couldn't pick him up because I couldn't stand up straight. And I was like, okay, I'll go take a shower. And that didn't work out very well. So
I know.
I just laid down. I like crawled across the floor and just pulled myself on the bed and just laid there. And my friend at the time took me. He came and got me, but I thought he was going to take me to the doctor. He took me to a doc in the box.
Oh, no.
And they didn't do any tests. So
Right.
they were saying, "Oh, it looks like you have a brain injury." I was like, "I already had a brain injury," and
Right.
I was very lethargic and I was slurring and I sounded like a drunk person. And the doctor
Almost
goes,
like you
"I
had a stroke
yeah."
in a
She's
way.
like, "Did you? How old are you?" And I told her, and she's like, "You're way too young to have a stroke." She goes,
Mhm.
"Okay." She goes, "Did you have a migraine?" I was like, "I don't know." like I'm like my speech is slurring like when I was talking to her. So they basically just wrote it as a retriggered TBI basically.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I couldn't. I felt really helpless. Like when you're trying to communicate when you're in that state, you can't. I was like, take me to the doctor, but I think it came out as blah 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 blah.
Right.
So
Right.
my friend they had me rest for like 2.5 weeks, and then it started again. And so my friend, I was like wrote it down like to the doctor, take me
Right.
to GBMC.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So then I was taken to GBMC, and the doctor there was she couldn't finish. She didn't want to. She was scared to misdiagnose it basically. So she was like, it could have been. She goes, you're and like again like the other doctor, it's you're way too young to have had a stroke. And she was like, well, maybe it's a what is it? A migraine. I can't remember what kind of migraine it is, but it like mimics
Mm.
a stroke. But she was like,
Right.
maybe it's that. And she goes, but I don't want to misdiagnose you because the MRIs came back normal, but I was showing these symptoms. So she was worried. So
Okay.
she was like, but you're also on your period. So she was like, like she didn't know what to do. So she just basically referred me to a neurologist basically.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Gotcha.
yeah, it was a mess. And then I basically healed from that, but I got slammed with hospital bills. So I had to like pay those off. And then like,
Wow.
yeah, that was a nightmare. I basically ended up writing a letter, basically like, explaining what had happened. And like, I'm not from this area. I don't know where anything is.
Right.
I'm like, I feel like I've just been blacked out for like a couple months. So, and then I had to go up to New York. I had a business meeting in New York, and then I had internal bleeding. So then we realized it was a lot more serious than it looked externally. Um, so I had to heal from that. And then I had
Wow.
like a cervical spine relapse in 2019. So I'm pretty much like done with injuries on the East Coast.
Right.
I'm just gonna go
Right.
back to California and chill.
Yes, 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 yes. And you were really great about writing stuff out. When you have a history, and I'm talking to listeners out there, when you have a history, a medical history, write out when you're in a good space, write out what has happened and write out that chronology of, this is what happened when. So when you're in a situation, people around you know where to grab that piece of paper. So because maybe you weren't being clear or logical because you were in a situation where you blacked out, hit the floor. And so people will need to know what's going on or the precipitating factors, so to speak. So that dialogue, that piece of paper, what you've written, that journal is so critical.
Mhm.
So really critical, especially when you're going to a new practitioner. So as we move on, and you've been through a lot and we've covered a lot here, I want you to talk about SheShed, your show.
Oh yeah, definitely. So SheShed. Now we're moving on to the fun things, guys. No more intensity, please. So SheShed actually happened. It's actually funny how this happened. So Siobhan had contacted me on LinkedIn, and I was just coming out of like the initial part of the car accident. And I told Shay about what happened. I'm like, I'm really worried about, like starting a show, knowing that I might have a relapse, which of course I did have during the first season. But Shay already knew what it was. She knew how to handle it, and she knew like basically like how to help me maneuver it. So it's a very fun show. We're fun. We're non-pretentious. It's very family friendly. And we basically bring experts on in their field, and sometimes we even bring people that are like basically learning or moving, starting a business, moving forward. And we learn about their field, their industry. We get really honest feedback from industry professionals about their field, what to expect, the good and the bad. It's very honest. Our
Right.
content initially starting was catered to teens and early 30s, but then we noticed that our group, our viewers were gradually moving up in age. So then we realized it's a lot of people that are transitioning out of careers or exploring new career options.
Right. Well, I love that. And where can people find the show?
So you can find Sulavon SheShed every Sunday on worldwidetv.tv. And you can
Okay.
also, if you want to actually like watch us online, we're on Roku. We're not on YouTube. A lot of times people try to search us on YouTube, and we're not actually on YouTube. And we keep it mainly on the station. So if you wanted to watch on an OTT platform, we're on Roku, Apple TV, Google Play, iTunes, Amazon Fire, and Kindle. You basically have to search Worldwide TV or Women on TV. If you search the show, it may or may not pull up. It just depends on how they're updating the SEO searches on the platforms.
Right. Yeah. Those are always tricky, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody's starting a business and somebody having a show, and those are always tricky. So I was having a discussion with my partner yesterday about the SEO.
Mm-hmm.
So your show sounds incredible. Your journey is really amazing. And I want to thank you for sharing that journey with us today. So as we come to the close of the interview, I'd like to ask you, if you were to leave the listeners with some words of wisdom, what would they be?
That's a good question. I was thinking there are maybe like 5 points that I would probably point out. So one is when you're getting started, don't rush or cut corners. I have definitely known girls, especially in modeling and entertainment, who have cut corners and that came back to bite them. And I am referring to like casting couch. Like, don't do that. Like, just don't do it. It all comes back around. I would say don't, like, for safety, just this is for like models and actresses, but it also applies to other industries as well. Don't meet people alone or attend any photo shoots alone. Always meet in a public place. Don't meet in people's hotel rooms. Don't meet at their houses. Don't do any of that. Like I didn't do that because I don't, I'm like, I have kind of like more of a conservative background. Like I would say definitely do not go to shoots alone. And if you're going to bring someone with you to a shoot, bring someone that's like physically intimidating, like someone that the person won't even try anything. That's what I would recommend. In terms of like models starting or getting started, there's Model Mayhem and modelscouts.com. They're both legitimate, but you still have to watch for possible predators on either site. It's people getting on the internet. Just be smart about it. And if you don't know, I mean, you can ask. There are forums where people will basically share with you, or so you can even send it to me, and I'll ask some of the talent scouts or talent managers that I know personally. Another thing I would say, especially if you're getting started, and this is catered more to people getting started or transitioning, is that when you are getting started, not just with modeling, but you want to build your networks and you want to build your experience, and that will always give you a competitive edge at castings. So even if you're not cast as a talent, if you have experience as like a business manager, if you have experience in sales, if you have experience with like any other thing, like even if it's like digital marketing, which is one of my other skills I would give at the time, that will definitely help you. So it's like, just be open to different experiences. So I think that a lot of times when people get started in their industry, whether it's modeling or entertainment or any other industry, they get tunnel vision because they just focus on that one objective, that one goal, but you're missing all of these opportunities around you. And I think that's really important, especially if you're someone that doesn't have support, or you constantly have to, like you have to worry about paying your rent and your bills and it's all on you. like be open, like be really open. I mean, don't be so open that like you're easy prey to predators, but like just be smart about it.
Right. Well, I think those are incredible words of wisdom. And thank you, Sulavon, for joining me on the Core Women podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun, Summer.
Thank you so much. If you would like to connect with Sulavon Bollinger, you can find her on LinkedIn and at Sulavons SheShed on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you need a strategic empowerment coach, contact me. If you want to tell your story of empowerment or how you have reconstructed your life to drive change, send me a video or an email of your story, providing permission to use it on my social media platforms. If you want to be featured on my podcast, reach out to me at info@corewomen.com. I want to hear from you and to get to know you. You are now part of the Core Women home. Let's get to know each other. Let's learn from one another. Please follow Core Women on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Please let your women friends know about this podcast. If you write about Core Women in your social media posts, please hashtag Core Women. This is all about women. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about Core Women, and please stay tuned for continued growth of the Core Women movement. Let's grow and drive change together.